Hi everyone. So I haven't put up a video in a while. Sorry about that. I've been really busy, but based on the last two videos on the HIIT training, there's actually some more I want to do on that. But I got the same question in a couple times, and about using NIRS to control the recoveries, specifically on the recoveries, and does that make sense? And does NIRS really give us information about recovery? Which I think is a great question, because especially in HIIT intervals, in HIIT training, making sure that you get the right recovery is really important. And there's not very many physiological parameters that help you kind of identify the right recovery. So I want to talk about that quickly. And my argument is, yes, I do think NIRS can help. It's not going to be perfect, and it kind of depends on what you're doing and on what you mean by recovery. But I do think it's an indicator that can help for sure. And the arguments for this are, I think, firstly, if you want to delve really physiologically in, there are some papers out by McCulley, Ryan and colleagues, and Yoshida and colleagues, and there's some other ones too, but that look at magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and they're looking at creatine phosphate curves. So basically the breakdown and the resynthesis of creatine phosphate, which is very important in energetics. So you're going to break down creatine phosphate to try to replenish ATP so you can maintain or repeat performance. And in those papers that I mentioned, it shows that there's a pretty good relationship between your NIR signal and the creatine phosphate curves you're measuring with the magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So as you break down creatine phosphate, your muscle oxygenation curves go down, and as you recover creatine phosphate, your muscle oxygenation curves come back up, and those are pretty in sync. Now, there's going to be some exceptions to that, which are talked about in the papers, but it seems to work pretty good. So the likeliness is very high that if you're decreasing your SMO2 value, you're taking taking creatine phosphate apart at a very high rate. And as your SMO2 curve recovers, you're replenishing creatine phosphate. So that's already an indicator that why your NIR signal is going to help you identify your recovery rate and when you're recovered. Now, to get a little bit more practical, which is because I'm a sports scientist, so I work much more in an applied setting, is that, well, what does if you're going to be more recovered, looking at your NIRS curve, well, then you should actually see that in performance, because that's really what matters to us. So if I'm going to use my NIRS signal to identify recovery, that should show in my, for example, repeatable performance. So if I'm doing sprint intervals, I should be able to repeat performance at a greater success rate if I'm controlling it nicely with NIRS than if I'm not. And a nice study to that, so apart from anecdotally that's true from my experience, to get a little bit more concrete on that, there's a study by Spencer and Duffield and colleagues, where they look at repeated sprint performances with active and passive recoveries, which is interesting in itself. And so they just did repeated bouts, repeated sprint intervals, and they had either between the bouts passive recovery, doing nothing, or your continued cycling at a lower rate. And they showed that the passive recovery, with passive recovery, your ability to maintain performance is higher. It's a little counterintuitive for a lot of people. But if you then actually use your NIRS device, you throw your Moxy on, you'll see that an active recovery slows down the NIRS signal recovery rate, or it stays down. It makes sense because you have to use oxygen even if you're pedaling slowly. You have an enhanced metabolism, so that energy has to come from somewhere to cycle, even if it's at a low intensity, and that's going to come from oxygen. So you actually slow down that recovery rate. And so if you repeat the exact same situation, the same bouts, with the same recovery times, your recovery is actually slowed down in the active recovery, and you see that the SMO2 curve doesn't recover to the same degree, and it has the same effect as what Duffield and colleagues saw, we saw that as well, is that your ability to maintain performance decreases. And it's reflected in the NIRS data that your ability to recover is decreased. So there seems to be something there, which makes a lot of sense. So just as a little bit of information about that, there's a lot more we could talk about that, but I do think that there's a lot of value is using your NIRS device to assess your recovery. It's not going to be good for everything, but I would say for interval training, probably the best physiological tool to help guide your recovery times. And so I'll try to put some other HIIT videos up too, or talk about that, because I'm not quite done. And please send me more questions, and I'll try to get some more videos up than I did in the last couple of weeks. Okay, thank you. Bye.